Hi guys, my name is Nicole Rice, and for the discussion this week, I chose the topic of microaggressions. So starting off why I chose this topic, I'm taking a current social problems class at BYU, and we've been talking a lot about microaggressions in the past, and how it affects minority groups and everything like that. So I thought it'd be very interesting for me to learn more about the social work perspective on microaggressions and how social workers can work to combat the struggles of minority groups in terms of microaggression. Um, and I just think it's very interesting to learn about how social workers can apply these things to their lives. All right, so the first article that I found is from the Washington Post, and it kind of was like an advice kind of article thing, but so it doesn't really have much of the social work point of view, which I guess is good. But it's called Miss Manners, Helping Kids Understand Microaggressions. So yeah, it's kind of like an advice page where people ask Miss Manners about, different topics. So this one happened to be teaching kids about microaggressions. So giving a brief overview of what microaggressions are, it talks about how microaggressions are often disguised as compliments or pleasantries. This is something that we talked a lot about in my current social problems class. Because oftentimes people aren't even aware that the things that they say are harmful and that they are microaggressions. So I learned a lot from that class about microaggressions and also reading this article as well about how, how we can make sure that the things we say are not harmful. This article also talked about how microaggressions contain implicit bias and they are rooted in a system of inequality and unfair advantages. Obviously, everything that affects minority groups, is stemmed in inequality, and the treatment of minority groups is often, they're often faced with unfair disadvantages, and people on the other side are privileged. So I think it's important to note that, obviously microaggressions are something that these minority groups do struggle with, but it's based on a larger system of inequality and disadvantages. So in talking about microaggressions in children, not in children, microaggressions and children, this article talked about how we should teach children about intersectionality and diversity and why it's very important for children to understand that people have different identities and different things that they go through and they struggle with, and how the things we say can be harmful to people in different ways that we may not even be aware of. It talks about different ways that we can teach children about microaggressions, and one of these ways is using how would you feel scenarios. And one of the ones from the article that I liked was something along the lines of how would you feel if someone pointed out something that is so central to you that you can't change about yourself, and just chose to comment on it when it wasn't really necessary. I think that's a pretty good example of a microaggression, and how even if the things we say we don't intend to be harmful, it still can have that effect on people, and so we need to be aware of the way that we phrase things and the things that we say to people, and if it's really necessary to comment on certain things. And another very important point from this article is that we should not ask others about their experiences for research purposes. I think particularly social workers too, it's our responsibility to do our own research, and we should not rely on minority groups to teach us about the things that we should and shouldn't say, but that's something that's kind of up to us, and we should just aim to be very kind and respectful people. Okay, this next article is from the Social Work Abstracts. It's called The Mediating Effects of Ethnic Identity on the Relationships Between Racial Microaggression and Psychological Well-Being. So obviously this one's more related to psychology and sociology and social work, and it gives more in-depth description of microaggressions and how they can be different for different minority groups and how they can be harmful to these groups. So first and foremost, it talks about how race in modern U.S. culture is socially constructed based on skin color, and how there's actually very little biological difference between racial groups, yet there is so much discrimination of these groups. It also talks about how microaggressions may be a particularly harmful form of discrimination due to the complex and stressful dynamics involved. I kind of will skip down to the last bullet point just because I think this kind of relates, but it talked about how there the subtle occurrences of discrimination are often harder to interpret, and so recipients can be confused about the intent of the comment and how to best respond, and also that this complexity may cause more psychological distress than other like blatant forms of discrimination. Um, so like the last article talked about, sometimes these like microaggressions can kind of be phrased as, compliments or pleasantries, and it can be hard for minorities to, kind of internalize that and validate it if, that was a microaggression, or if not, sorry, back to my current social problems class. A lot of minorities shared that it's often very difficult to like understand your feelings on, you know, the comments that people say to you, and if it can be considered a microaggression, and like this says, how to best respond to those things. Um, so back to the point that I skipped, microaggressions often refer to insults and slights containing negative stereotypes that are frequently experienced by people from racial and ethnic minority groups. So I think it's important to note that a lot of times these microaggressions that can seem like compliments or pleasantries or things like that, they're often based on negative stereotypes, and even if the intention isn't harm, it can be very harmful for minority groups and marginalized groups who have to deal with people assuming things about them based off of these negative stereotypes. Okay, so in terms of the code of ethics for these two articles, I thought that the importance of human relationships and competence were the most important and related to the most to this topic. I first thought the importance of human relationships just because they're an important vehicle for social change. And, we have the opportunity to strengthen relationships among people in an effort to like promote, restore, maintain, and enhance the well-being of individuals and groups and just everyone. And I think an important part of human relationships is understanding the perspective of the people that you are surrounded by, and understanding that even if you have a different life perspective from them and different life experiences, that you can try to empathize with them and understand where they're coming from. And I feel like this is very applicable to microaggressions and social workers. And the second bullet point is competence. And this is kind of was talked about in the textbook when they discussed microaggressions, just because it talked about how, social workers should acknowledge the experiences of their clients and try to like gain as much knowledge as possible about, microaggressions and how they can affect people, and also be able to apply this knowledge to practice. So I think competence, is applied to microaggressions in that way, that social workers have like a personal responsibility to make sure that they are educated on this topic. Okay, to compare and contrast the two articles, the first article was talking more about children and microaggressions, whereas the second article focused mainly on college students. That was like kind of the point of the study. And the first article talked more about like scenarios in which parents should respond to. Like I said, it was more like of an advice kind of thing. So they were giving advice to parents on how they should respond to certain situations. And the first article gave a more like brief definition of microaggressions, whereas the second article, talked in depth about the different types of microaggressions and how it's different for different minority groups and how it affects minorities psychologically. And it also the second article talked about how social workers can work and help minorities. And then both articles obviously talked about the importance of teaching about microaggressions and why it's so important that people understand how the things that they say can be harmful to people, even if they don't intend it to be that way, and how we can learn and be better for others. And both articles also talked about the effects of microaggressions on minorities and how it can be very difficult for them in their daily lives. So my question is, how can social workers who do not experience microaggressions help their clients who do experience them? I feel like obviously a large majority of students at BYU are white, and I think if we are going to social work, I think it's important to realize that we're going to talk to people who have different experiences than us, and I think it's important to, answer this question: how can we talk with people and understand people who have different life experiences than us? So here are my sources. Thank you guys for listening. That's the end of my presentation. and thank you.